Hello, and welcome to A Journeyman's Travels. My name is Daniel Scheifler, your host, and welcome. This season we've been talking about first principles, and we just transitioned into the second of the major topics under these first principles, that of leadership. And our first discussion point there, our first axiomatic atomic unit of reasoning in leadership is that it's not about you, but rather about the people you will be leading. And discuss that is the critical facet of leadership, is in the focus on others, their work, and their impact. But today, I want to talk about that and build on it in a practical way, because after all, the leader is still acting. So what should govern his actions if obviously they're supposed to be focused on building others? And I touched on this last time, that leadership is not really best considered as a promotion, but rather a full fundamental career change, right? Think about it like this. When you're first promoted into leadership, there's going to be a great deal of change. But think about your previous promotions. Say from a junior engineer to a senior engineer. What's different? Well, junior engineer to regular engineer is a growth in the same kind, to do the same work you were already doing, but more effectively and perhaps with a little greater latitude because you're trusted to know the basic standards. Where the junior's getting a ton of hands-on coaching, the engineer might be expected to either deliver some of that, or to be able to do it without as much coaching. And even more so as they become the senior, where they're expected to teach the junior engineer how to do the work, but also to be able to design the work and just do it themselves. Now certainly, there is some overlap in the kind of things we'd expect a leader to do, the coaching and the design of the work, but it's still just the expectation to do more of the root job. But the moment you step from a senior engineer into an engineering leader, the job's actually to stop doing that, while keeping your knowledge and the elements of the coaching there, they're still added to your job. But now you have something completely different included, which is leading people, picking the work to be done, not simply designing how to solve it, but in coaching the people and figuring out what do they need to be capable of in the future, and producing capabilities that your organization will need. Right? This is a great place where that classic phrase, what got you here won't get you there, comes in. But of course then that leaves us with this question. How do we lead then? Like, what do I do? What does it look like? Great question. One of my favorite. What does it look like? Let's talk about it. Because we're going to talk about one of the classic proxies for productivity. And that is time. No, seriously, let's look at how you spend your time. Because attention or focus is the chief commodity of humankind, and we have to spend it, right? You can't save the seconds from right now by pausing this episode, storing them in a jar, and opening them a year from now. It doesn't work like that. You have to spend the seconds you have now. And after all, this is how the internet runs, trying to buy all of the advertisements and get your attention to buy! But focus, the attention, is actually pretty difficult to measure. So we use the closest proxy because it's time. You can't spend focus without spending time, so we track time. And then we have a follow-up on that to check that we're spending the time well. But we kind of touched on this already, that we shouldn't be spending our time the same way we used to. We touched on it last time when we talked about the temptation from the fact that you knew how to do the job, and it can be tempting just to do it yourself, because in the short term, it is in fact faster. But now that we're leading, how should the way we're spending our time be different? Obviously, we shouldn't be doing our team's work for them, because then our work's not getting done, and that's not very effective. But that work as a leader is a little difficult to succinctly describe. But I'll lump it into these two broad categories, right? The leader's job is to discover and to decide. Right? This is strategic work, communication, and sometimes it's accountability. Right? Because in leading, we're supposed to be out ahead, leading the charge, as it were. But that means we have to figure out where we're going and discover a way to walk there, and then show it to others and help them continue it. This is a brain work of a different kind, where previously you might have been doing problem solving or rote process execution. You are now required to reclassify the kind of time that was good to spend and the kind of time that's not. So let me offer then a model for thinking about time. And one of the best models I have ever had for this is the classic Eisenhower matrix, right? Now, Eisenhower, like literally the president from the military, divided his time along two axes: urgency and importance. Everything is somewhere on both of those axes, so let's set them up in a simple little table, right? On the top of the table, we'll have the important. On the bottom, we'll have the not important. And on the left, we'll have the urgent. On the right, we'll have the not yet urgent. The top left, then, the urgent important content, we'll call Q1. And this is the moments of like, oh my gosh, production is on fire, we have to jump in and fix it. Okay. That would be kind of reactive in nature. We don't always predict when this time comes up. But it's got to be done right now. And because it's important, you're not just going to drop it. This could be paying bills. This could be performance reviews sometimes. This could be, most commonly, the production bugs when you're developing software. Now, in contrast, on the not urgent side of that same importance is what I would prefer to call proactive time. This is the kind of time that we're investing intentionally by discovering what new capabilities we need, discovering the tools that are out there, and getting ahead and planning. These are getting ahead of the problem before they become urgent. But there's an interesting interaction that Q1 and Q2 have. You see, you could plan time to prepare for a peer accountability session, and then a production bug come up in the middle of that. And so instead of having 2 hours to prepare, you now have 30 minutes left because the production bug took an hour and a half. And you have to rush through your peer accountability preparation, which means that that proactive time that was supposed to be is now actually reactive time because it's got to get done right now. This contagion effect in Q1 is incredibly important and is something that a leader almost always has to fight against actively, because it will eat all available time if you do not control it. But what about this unimportant side of the spectrum? What are those? Okay, fair. So, not particularly important, but urgent. Usually I would file as a distraction. Zzz, zzz. Oh, hold on, let me get that. This little black box in our pockets? Key source of distractions. It sounds important because it's urgent. But when we get there, it's just, oh, hey boss, I'm not going to be there for 5 minutes, hang on a sec. When we could have been spending that time focusing on a proactive action. But it distracts and then critically causes us to have to reload the context, because context shifting is a thing and it does take time. And then there's the last one, which everyone knows they should be avoiding. Neither urgent nor important, but those are the days where you are just so burnt out that you spend the time kind of scrolling infinitely through Facebook. That wasn't good recovery time. That wasn't really time invested in doing anything in particular, but it was how you spent your time. And most of us would agree it's kind of a waste. So obviously our goal should be to eliminate Q3 and Q4, distraction and waste, and put them into the Q1, Q2 time, because then we're working on the important stuff. But I'll go further and suggest that you really want to optimize for working in Q2. Prevent as much stuff from becoming Q1 as possible. But it's important to note that this matrix isn't a static model, right? I had mentioned that production bugs are oftentimes Q1 for an engineer. Rather, that this matrix needs to be seen as a lens or tool for deciding what the actions we ought to focus on by helping us to intentionally classify them based upon our role and where we ought to serve. So let's take a couple of examples. You got a junior engineer who might classify designing systems or learning new language or even writing code as Q2 time, getting ahead of the problem. Let me go learn this new design pattern or this new language I know is coming up so I can continue to increase my skills. Meanwhile, the Q1 for the engineering lead might be writing code because the design aspect and the coaching aspect is more his Q2 time. And of course, Q1, depending upon the circumstances, depends. If you end up being at a manager or leadership level and you're writing code, you are almost certainly doing something incorrect. Right? Something went so wrong that you had to go fix it. Sometimes that happens, and sometimes that's the right response, but it is relevant to categorize it as reacting to the problem. Meanwhile, the act of going off and learning a new programming language might be more appropriate to classify as a distraction for the leader, because that's no longer the key skill they need to develop. Instead, learning new leadership techniques, understanding DevOps, or widening their sphere and understanding, either for the business or accounting or any other number of those things, may become the real Q2 kind of time, because of the nature of his role. So now we got the model. So what? What do we do with it? Well, okay, without some sense of where you are, it can be pretty difficult to identify a better path, that is, to improve. So let's use the model to help you to identify the kinds of work first and to which quadrant each of them belong. And then the next step has to be to measure where your time is actually being spent. So start by tracking your time in like 15-minute blocks every day for a week and categorize each of the activities in those 15. But here's the key. Be brutally honest. And if you need help being brutally honest on this data, go talk with a trusted mentor and walk through it with them. Now, before I hear any objections of, there's no way I could do that, you can. I have done it, down to the minute, in fact, for a week. It is difficult, but it is totally plausible. Just set up some time the week ahead, maybe to establish yourself a simple Excel sheet with a sheet for every day and a simple 15-minute marker, right? Start when you get in, and every 15 minutes, look at what you've done. Yes, it will be more work in the short run, but it's data that will be invaluable for you to help identify what kind of things are you doing, and is it really where you want to be spending your time, even if that accountability is a little unpleasant in the time. So, based upon your findings, of course, cut out the Q3 and Q4 time. Distraction is waste, right out the window. This is hard. I recognize it. But it is a necessary step because you'll reclaim a couple hours of time maybe that way that you can spend on places you'd much rather, becoming intentional of it. Next, look for what kind of activities end up in that Q1 slot and what it might look like to reserve Q2 time. Does it mean scheduling blocks on your calendar? Does it mean setting up a do not disturb on your team so that people don't come bug you? But look at those and very seriously find ways to build the structure you need to govern your time in a way that makes sense. Personally, I strongly recommend the Pomodoro technique for this, because I found it helped me establish a strong rhythm in my work of about half an hour per product time that I could consistently schedule against, and it made sense. Okay, now I'm getting into this space, and it gave me the time I needed for some of my tasks to go heads down, work hard on it, and then be able to feel like I had accomplished something in that time. So, when we talk about first principles of leadership, the first one is, of course, that leadership ain't about you, it's about your team. But that still leaves a gap for what we ought to be doing. So the second first principle of leadership is that leadership requires you to change your relationship with time, that it is about how you, the leader, spend your time. Because obviously your focus moves off of the self and onto the effectiveness of others. That also means that the stuff you spend your time on has to shift. And that this, because it requires completely new skills and new focus, is more akin to a career change than it is to a standard promotion. New skills and new ways of thinking are absolutely necessary for success in the role. And the most critical change is how you think about your time. What used to be the most valuable work for you to do as the developer is no longer the most valuable work for you to do as a leader. And getting better as a leader is not the same way you get better as a developer, though they do have some overlap. And so instead, you need to cultivate a learning for how to focus on the right things, on not doing your team's work, but doing the right work and finding the right work for your team. Leadership is about how you spend your time. Thank you for joining us on this Journeyman's Travels, and I look forward to seeing you in the next journey. Until then, good luck.